This morning. I'll tell you what, I don't know about you, but this past week after being off for Thanksgiving, it was rough getting back in the groove, wasn't it? But we have to look at the bright side, Brother Gary. 3 weeks is Christmas. Is that the bright side? I don't know. It may not be the bright side. But it's going to be here whether we're ready or not. Now, for our lesson today, and actually for the next few weeks, Steve, I may have to go 3 weeks, okay? We're going to take our last lesson on forgiveness and expand on it just a little further. And if you remember on our lesson on forgiveness, we talked about how God forgives us and how we should forgive others. And how the most important thing about forgiveness is that we have to choose to forgive. And to truly forgive someone, we have to start with a decision to surrender our pride. That's hard to do sometimes. And forgive from the heart. And once we do that, God can begin healing us of our pain and our resentment. Now, on the other hand, what if we decide that we are so upset and we're so hurt over the situation that we don't want to forgive someone, or that we simply just can't forgive someone? So what happens next? That's when bitterness sets in. And that's what our lesson is going to be on for the next few weeks. So I'm going to start off with what actually is bitterness. Bitterness is defined as a form of anger, intense hostility, and resentment that shows itself through complaining, plotting, scheming, and manipulating. Boy, that's a mouthful, ain't it? I'm going to read it again, Brother Steve. Is a form of anger, intense hostility, and resentment that shows itself through complaining, plotting, scheming, and manipulating. So let me give you some examples and some facts about bitterness. Bitterness is our refusal to let go when someone or something is taken away from us. It's being constantly hurt by a memory and holding on to that hurt until it has a hold on you. How many of y'all got some bitterness in your life today? Every blame one of you better raise your hand, because we all do. I said something to Brother Gary about it. He said, yeah, I can just pull it out of my back pocket. I got plenty of bitterness. But bitterness makes us foolish. It provokes us to say things we shouldn't say and do stupid things. It's an emotional suicide and is a very slow form of destroying one's peace of mind. It's like drinking poison while hoping the other person will die from the poison that you're drinking. Bitterness brings jealousy and strife, and it can simply make you miserable. So based on all these facts, do you think there are some side effects to having bitterness? Definitely are. And I'm going to tell you about 3. Number 1, bitterness can cause physical illnesses. More and more medical professionals are getting some kind of link to the way we think and the way our bodies function. Bitterness, anger, and other negative emotions have been associated with high blood pressure, cardiac disorders, ulcers, and a host of other physical activity. Just like I said about forgiveness 3 weeks ago, these are the same things that affects us when we don't forgive someone. Number 2, Bitterness can cause us to have a spiritual stumbling block. It hinders our relationship with Christ. What kind of Christian testimony can we give if we are bitter to one of our neighbors, Brother Ralph? How can we talk about the forgiveness of God to others when we refuse to forgive those who have wronged us? Number 3, bitterness can cause damage to future relationships. An unforgiving spirit is the root of bitterness. And bitterness can paralyze you, Sister Kathy. Even when you want to love someone else, you can't, because you got that bitterness inside of you. So we're going to be looking at an example in the Bible of how bitterness destroyed and ruined a person's life. 1 Samuel chapter 18. Now, if you're expecting, I'm not going to say, Brother Steve, I'm going to go over 4 verses today. I'm going to go over like 2 chapters, okay? Because I'm telling a story this morning. So we are going to be reading chapter 18 through 31, not all today, okay, but over the next few weeks. So once you get to chapter 18, and Tony's going to have it up on the screen too, but still nice to read along in the Bible. All right, so before we get started, let's look at a little background of where we are. God appointed Saul as the first king of Israel. And the book of Samuel tells us the story of the bitterness in Saul's life. Saul actually was the ideal image of a king. He had all of the talents and characteristics of a good leader. He had striking appearance. He had personal courage. He was a man of action. But as we're going to see, even though Saul began his reign as a respected and favored ruler, he ended his life in defeat, in sorrow, and in suicide. Now, our scripture is going to start during the time period after David had killed Goliath. And when we think of David, we think, hey, this is one of the greatest men in the Bible. You know, he was a shepherd, he was a poet, he was a giant killer, he was a king, he was an ancestor of Jesus. And the Bible makes no effort to hide David's failures, because he had many, just like we do, but God always referred to him as a man after his own heart. He sinned many times, but he was always quick to confess, and his confessions were always from the heart. And although he sinned greatly, he didn't sin repeatedly, and his repentance was always genuine. He learned from his mistakes. So Samuel was a judge, and he had anointed David as king of Israel, but it was done in secret. Saul was still legally the king of Israel. So we're going to start reading in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. So Jonathan was Saul's son. And Jonathan and David were real close friends. Their relationship was one of the deepest and the closest in the Bible. Jonathan was a prince of Israel, but he realized that David was going to be the next king and not him. He didn't care. That didn't weaken their relationship at all. Jonathan would rather lose the throne than to lose a friend. Verses 5 through 8. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. And it came to pass as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tabrets, with joy, and with the instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? So Saul's appreciation for David had started turning into jealousy. David had saved Saul's reputation in fighting Goliath, but instead of being indebted to David, Saul became angry. He became jealous. That's exactly the way bitterness works. We all become angry over some kind of incident, and we forget what happened beforehand. Verses 9 through 11. And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. And David played with his hand as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. So in this jealous rage, Saul attempted to murder David by throwing his spear at him, all because David was more popular than he was. Here's another good example of bitterness, how we act foolishly and irrationally. Verses 12 through 15. And Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, and was departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from him, and made him his captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved wisely, himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Wherefore when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. So Saul was afraid that David was going to take over the kingdom, even though David had no plans to do that. He didn't care. Verses 16 through 21. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out and came in before them. And Saul said to David, Behold, my elder daughter Merab, her will I give thee to wife. Only be thou valiant for me, and fight for the Lord's battles. For Saul said, Let not mine hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him. And David said unto Saul, Who am I, and what is my life, or my father's family in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king? But it came to pass at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given unto Adriel, the Melathelite, to wife. And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and this thing pleased him. And Saul said, I will give him her, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, Thou shalt this day be my son-in-law in one of the twain. So here this bitterness turns into scheming and plotting. Go back and look at verse 17. He had promised David his daughter Merab. And then in verse 19, he ended up giving her to Adriel. Then he said, okay, I will promise you Michal. I will give her to you. If we can't get back at somebody ourselves, we're going to get somebody else to get back at them. You know what? That's the way it is. Manipulating events. Verses 22 through 26. And Saul commanded his servants, saying, commune with David secretly, and say, behold, the king hath delight in thee, and all his servants love thee. Now therefore be the king's son-in-law. And Saul's servants spoke these words in the ears of David, and David said, seemeth it to you a light thing to be a king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man and lightly esteemed? And the servants of Saul told him, saying, on this manner spake David. And Saul said, thus shall ye say to David, the king desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines to be avenged of the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired. So old Saul, he was getting his servants to go lie to David. And you can see in that verse 25 that his main goal was for the Philistines to kill David. 27 through 30. Wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, to wife. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was yet the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass after they went forth that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by. Everyone admired David, and Saul knew that the Lord was with him. That scared Saul, made him jealous, and he despised David even more for this. Even with all of this going on, David was still being humble, doing everything that Saul wanted him to do. In verse 30, he was the best servant that Saul ever had. Jump over to chapter 19. Verses 1 through 6. And Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul, my father, seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see, that I will tell thee. And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee very good. For he did put his life in his hand, and slew the Philistine, and the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. Thou sawest it, and didst rejoice. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood, to slay David without a cause? And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul sware, as the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. So old Jonathan, he was taken up for his friend David. He was asking his father Saul, why? How could you kill David without a just cause? David had been good to Saul. and represented him in battle. So that last verse, that verse 6, Saul said he would not kill David. Verses 7 through 10. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all of these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as in times past. And there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines, and slew them with a great slaughter, and they fled from him. And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul as he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand. And David played with his hand. And Saul sought to smite David, even to the wall with a javelin, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence. And he smote the javelin into the wall. And David fled, and he escaped that night. So even though Saul had told Jonathan, his son, hey, I'm not going to kill David, David was sitting over there playing his harp, and old Saul throwed that javelin over there trying to kill him again. Verses 11 through 16. Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, if thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster, and covered it with a cloth. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he is sick. And Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed, that I may slay him. And when the messengers were come in, behold, there was an image in the bed, with a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster. So old Saul, he continued to plot to kill David. He had sent messengers to David's house to slay him. He even told them if David was sick, he didn't care, still bring him to him, and he was going to kill him. Verses 17 and 18. And Saul said unto Michal, why hast thou deceived me so, and sent away mine enemy, that he is escaped? And Michal answered Saul, he said unto me, let me go. Why should I kill thee? So David fled and escaped, and came to Samuel to Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. So even Saul's daughter, Michal, was protecting David. It was his wife. She should try to protect him. But the Lord was definitely with David, because every time Saul's servants came to kill him, he was always able to escape. Now let's jump to chapter 20, verses 1 through 4. And David fled from Naioth in Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, what have I done? What is mine iniquity? And what is my sin before thy father, that he seeketh my life? And he said unto him, God forbid, thou shalt not die. Behold, my father will do nothing either great or small, but that he will show it me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so. And David sware moreover and said, thy father certainly knoweth that I have found grace in thine eyes. And he saith, let not Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, there is but a step between me and death. Then said Jonathan to David, whatsoever thy soul desireth, I will even do it for thee. So here David is talking to Jonathan again. Said, man, I don't understand. Why does Saul want to kill me? What have I ever done to him? Jonathan told him that his father would not plan to do evil to David without telling him, because he was his son. But finally in verse 3 and verse 4, Jonathan was convinced. So he asked David what he wanted him to do. Verses 5 through 13. And David said unto Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I shall not fail to sit with the king at meat. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field until the third day at even. If thy father at all miss me, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me, that he might run to Bethlehem his city. For there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family. If he say this, it is well. Thy servant shall have peace. But if he be very wroth, then be sure that evil is determined by him. Therefore thou shalt deal kindly with thy servant, for thou hast brought thy servant into a covenant of the Lord with thee. Notwithstanding, if there be in me iniquity, slay me thyself. Why shouldest thou bring me to thy father? And Jonathan said, Far be it from thee, for if I knew certainly that evil was determined by my father to come upon thee, then would I not tell thee? Then David to Jonathan, Who shall tell me? Or what if thy father answer thee roughly? And Jonathan said unto David, Come, and let us go out into the field. And they went out both of them into the field. And Jonathan said unto David, O Lord God of Israel, when I have sounded my father about tomorrow any time, or the third day, and behold, if there be good toward David, and I will send not unto thee, and show it to thee. The Lord do so, and much more to Jonathan. But if it please my father to do thee evil, then I will show it thee, and send thee away, that thou may goest in peace. And the Lord be with thee, as he hath been with my father. So David had a plan to prove to Jonathan that Saul was going to kill him. Every day all these servants would sit down with the king. David was going to stay gone for 3 days. And Saul's reaction to him not being there was going to be the deciding factor. If Saul said, It is well, then David would be safe. But if Saul became angry, then Jonathan would know that evil was within Saul. Jump to verse 18. We're going to read through 23. Then Jonathan said to David, Tomorrow is the new moon, and thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty. And when thou hast stayed 3 days, then thou shalt go down quickly, and come to the place where thou didst hide thyself, when the business was in hand, and shalt remain by the stone Ezel. And I will shoot 3 arrows on the side thereof, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send a lad, saying, Go, find out the arrows. If I expressly say unto the lad, Behold, the arrows are on this side of thee, take them. Then come thou, for there is peace to thee, and no hurt, as the Lord liveth. But if I say this unto the young lad, Behold, the arrows are beyond thee, go thy way, for the Lord hath sent thee away. And as touching the matter which thou and I have spoken of, behold, the Lord be between thee and me forever. So Jonathan told David he will let him know what his father's reaction is by shooting 3 arrows where David was in the field. And he's going to send a boy to the field to pick up these arrows. And if Jonathan told the boy the arrows are on one side or the other side, then David would be safe from Saul. If Jonathan told the boy the arrows are beyond him, then David was in danger. Verses 24 through 31. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon was come, the king set him down to eat meat. And the king sat upon his seat, as at other times, even upon a seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, and David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul spoke not anything that day, for he thought, Something hath befallen him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean. And it came to pass on the morrow, which was the 2nd day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said unto Jonathan his son, Wherefore cometh not the son of Jesus to meat, neither yesterday nor today? And Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. And he said, Let me go, I pray thee, for our family hath a sacrifice in the city, and my brother, he hath commanded me to be there. And now, if I have found favor in thine eyes, let me go away, I pray thee, and see my brethren. Therefore he cometh not unto the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, Thou, son of the perverse rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion, and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. So old Jonathan, he got the answer. His father became angry because David wasn't there. Saul was actually angered at Jonathan. We're going to see that here in these next verses, 32 through 34. And Jonathan answered Saul his father and said unto him, Wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done? He kept asking him the same question over and over again, and he never could get an answer out of Saul. And Saul cast a javelin at him to smite him, whereby Jonathan knew that it was determined of his father to slay David. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and did eat no meat the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame. So Jonathan continued to ask why David should be slain, what he had done. And at verse 33, Saul tried to kill his own son, Jonathan. So Jonathan knew what his plans were for old David. Bitter, angry parents often verbally abuse their children, but in this case, old Saul took that one step further. Verses 35 through 42. And it came to pass in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field at the time appointed with David, and a little lad with him. And he said unto the lad, Run, find out now the arrows which I shoot. And as the lad ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the lad was come to the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan cried after the lad and said, Is not the arrow beyond thee? And Jonathan cried after the lad, Make speed, haste, stay not. And Jonathan's lad gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the lad knew not anything, only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his artillery unto his lad and said unto him, Go, carry them to the city. And as soon as the lad was gone, David arose out of a place toward the south, and fell on his face to the ground, and bowed himself 3 times, and they kissed one another, and wept one with another, until David exceeded. And Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. So here that original plan between David and Jonathan about the boy shooting the arrows was put into place. Jonathan knew that his father was going to kill David. So him and David prayed about it. So I'm going to stop right here, and I know we went through a lot of verses and chapters, but this is a story. And if y'all want to continue this story, by all means, we're going to pick it up next week, and we're going to continue with Saul's bitterness. It's going to get worse, guys. So I appreciate your attention. Oh, I went over, Brother Steve. Would you mind ending us in prayer?